Electrocast.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
What do Mattel, Banana Republic, ButcherBox, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet that also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. And that's no industry secret. That's Shopify. Learn more at shopify.com/enterprise.
This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
A learn-it-all leader isn't somebody who's just out there learning constantly. They're learning, doing, iterating, and always trying to find ways to get better and also give it back and help others become great leaders.
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, I hope all is well with you today, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. If you've been listening for a long time, I want to thank you for tuning in each week. The success of this podcast is because of your loyal viewership. If you're new, welcome aboard. The purpose of this podcast is to build a world with better bosses, and we do that by introducing you to the greatest minds working in the leadership space. Now, our guests are authors and academics, they're podcasters, entrepreneurs, business leaders, military leaders, and successful leadership practitioners in a variety of industries. And our goal is to provide you with practical information to help you along your leadership path, whether you're new to leadership or a seasoned pro. So thank you for listening in. It's an honor to be your host and leadership guide in this journey. As you know, we could not do this important work without our core sponsors, the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, Leader Connect, and our latest sponsor, Pharaoh Skincare. I highly recommend you check out these companies and give them some love by following the links in the show notes. You can find links to all of my books as well. Now, today we're talking about the concept of lifelong learning, and my guest is the CEO of Learnit, Damon Lembi. We sat down and talked about the problem of managers who think they know it all. Now, these are bosses who think they don't need to learn, they don't need to get better, and they certainly don't need the input of others to make critical decisions. In other words, these are bad bosses. Damon introduces us to the idea of a learn-it-all leader. This is a leader who is humble, curious, and is always looking for opportunities to get better. True leadership requires lifelong learning, as we will see in this important episode. If you want to learn something new today, listen into my conversation with Damon. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Damon Lembi. Damon is a two-time best-selling author and the host of the Learn It All podcast. He's also CEO of Learnit, a live learning platform that has upskilled over 2 million people. Drawing from his prior baseball career, Damon brings an athlete's perspective to leadership. Through his journey, he has gained invaluable insights into what helps organizations grow, how great leaders learn, and why a Learn It All company can outpace its competitors every time. I'm excited to have him on the show to learn more from his experiences. So Damon, welcome to the show.
John, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's an honor to meet you. It's great to meet you. And I'm excited to talk about learning and growing and your experience as an athlete. But first of all, one of the things I saw in your latest book, you say that great leaders aren't born, they're not made either. They're in the making. And I love that, but explain what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is I look at it as leadership is a continuous journey. It's not a fixed destination. It isn't something that you simply become at a certain point and then you stop evolving. You know what I mean? It's an ongoing process of growth and learning. And when I say that not being born, some people out there think that leadership is an innate ability. It's a talent. It's something that you're either born with or you don't have. But I don't really think that's the case. While some people have, let's say, natural charisma or certain qualities, I believe that leadership is built and developed over experiences and time instead of something that you're born with. And when it comes to, let's say, not being made, you don't just become a great leader by taking a few classes or reading some books or having like this really strict path. In my opinion, there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to becoming a leader. To me, it's all about adaptability, constant learning, execution, not just learning, but execution, and being open to change. And so I think the key is that leadership is basically, it's a work in progress. You're always learning, adjusting, evolving, facing new challenges. And as you develop as a leader, you learn from feedback, mistakes, and really, I think a lot of it comes down to just being curious.
It's interesting you say that, because I think I've learned that along my journey, is that it's sort of a never-ending, lifelong journey. But like you think that some point you've mastered something. So why is it like that we master leadership? Why is it has to be a continuous journey? Why is it a lifelong? Why can't we just sort of figure it out and then we have the best answers for all the time?
Well, first of all, I typically don't have all the answers to begin with. I always have to find and go different places to get them or surround myself by great people. And I also think that, I'm 52 years old, and I think leadership's really evolved and changed over time. And at least how I led 20, 30 years ago is much, much different than it is today. And you have all these different generations, Gen Z, millennial, and everybody, and they have different goals and purposes and ways of seeing things. So I think it's important to continue to learn, adapt, and be able to evolve as a leader. And doing that takes constant learning.
So how do you develop a mindset to be a lifelong learner? Because one of the things that I struggle with is that the people that consume my podcast, the people that read my books, probably that read your books, are the ones that are working hard to become better leaders. They understand it's a lifelong process. The ones that consider themselves having arrived, they're the ones not listening to leadership podcasts and trying to get better. So what's the shift that has to take place to create that mindset of being like, look, I'm going to be curious, I'm going to learn, I'm going to try to get better at this because I know it's always evolving?
I think that in some people, it's just the way the way they've always been, that they're humble and they're curious and they want to continue to grow and learn. And others who are able to make the shift maybe start off as what I call a know-it-all. And maybe something doesn't go well for them and they get humbled and they realize that, hey, my approach wasn't the best. And they're able to adapt, become more humble, and learn and grow. Where I'm sure you've seen this just like I have. There are certain people out there, even friends of mine, who are know-it-alls. They've got it all figured out. No matter what you try to tell them, they kind of roll their eyes and look at you and they're not really paying attention because they have all the answers. They have it all figured out. And those people, they're not listening to your podcast or they're not reading my book or your book. They've just got it all figured out. It's their way or the highway. And I think the problem with that, John, is, and I'm sure you probably agree with me, that I think you're going to get stomped on. You're going to be left behind in the dust if you have all the answers and you're not open to change and adapt.
Yeah, I can see that as well. Yeah, for sure. You've coined the phrase, and I love it, the learn-it-all leader. And you just mentioned the difference between that and a know-it-all leader. So learn-it-all leader, what's that encompass? Is just like we've been talking about, just lifelong learning? Is there more to it?
There is more to it because I had a guy in my podcast, David Katz, who said, learning without doing is treason. And I think that that's fantastic. You can take classes and you can read 100 books, but if you don't put any of it into practice, if you don't execute on anything, then I think you're really wasting, you're wasting your time and effort. Where I think that part of being a learn-it-all leader, there's certain traits that I think are really important. One of those is having the courage to go out and try things, not being afraid to make mistakes. And because a lot of times that's where the best learning comes in play. If you fail at something, you get feedback like I used to in baseball, where, maybe you strike out and you get some instant feedback. You got to come learn from your last mistakes and put it in practice. So a learn-it-all leader isn't somebody who's just out there learning constantly. They're learning, doing, iterating, and always trying to find ways to get better and also give it back and help others become great leaders.
I love that you shared that, because I think one of the things I've been working on my doctorate right now. And so in spending time in the academic world, you get a lot of learning and a lot of studies and a lot of details. And the other side of the fence is practitioners, which is what I've done for 30 years. It's like I've done a lot of things and learned through that. And what's interesting is that they're like two separate camps in a lot of cases, where the academics do all the learning and the studying and the research, and they come up with all these great theories. And oftentimes it never bridges over to the practice side. Like I was surprised at so many things I never heard of when I started studying leadership at a doctoral level. I'm like, I've been doing this 30 years. I never even heard of this theory. I've never heard of this idea. And so I part of my job is try to figure out how to blend the two worlds, like bringing the practical and the academic together. And I love what you say here. You said, I don't know if it was learning or knowledge without action is treason. I love that idea, right? Is that you've got to actually put the rudder in the water. You got to steer the sailboat, and you got to figure out what worked, what didn't work. And because I think there's a lot of learning that takes place just through mistakes, through things that just didn't work, or things that do work. And you sort of build this experience level just by all the various actions you take place. So I think that's a big, important part of learning as well.
I agree with you 100%. And I'm not going to, say anything negative about Ivy League schools or, getting PhDs, whatever. That's fantastic. Now, that wasn't me growing up. Like I said, I was a baseball player. I went to Arizona State. And at the time, learning, education, that type of education was kind of lower on my list. But I think it's important. It's great, especially somebody like you who could kind of merge the two. And I think the book learning and everything is great, but you also have to put it into practice, like we talked about. And I think that Learn It All leaders are great extractors as well. They're able to learn from everybody that they come in touch with. So they open themselves up to a world where they, like we talked about a little bit, they're curious, they're asking questions, they're getting ideas, and they can get more out of than just, reading books and, taking classes. I think you got to stick your neck out there and put it into practice, because like you and I both said, that's where a lot of the real learning takes place, is trying, failing, doing, and trying it again.
Yeah. I mean, for me, at least, I as much as I'm an academic and study for my doctorate, I'm a practical learner. I have to do it, and I have to learn the hard way sometimes. I've got to make the mistakes. I got to fall on my face. And those lessons are really deeply embedded in me now because I've done it, versus just reading a book about, no, don't do this, or this is going to happen. I've got to see it myself, and it's actually a great way to learn, is making, mistakes and failing, for sure. One thing I was going to wondering is you talk about being a baseball player and you learned a lot of leadership through athletics. What were some unique, because I think it's a unique way to come at leadership is from an athletic perspective, especially a team sport. What are some key lessons that you learned along the way as an athlete, as a baseball player, that sort of really work well when you're talking to people about the leadership of business or any other entity?
So for me, a very short version of my story is that I played college baseball. I thought I was going to go pro. That didn't work out. And John, I was left at 22. Like, what is my identity? Everything I was put into being a baseball player. And when that ended, I was kind of at a loss, and I didn't know if any of my skills were transferable. And what I've been able to find over the years, that what I call an athletic education, was incredible. And you learn things like collaboration, working well with others, discipline that I'm sure obviously you got out of the military, persistence, and all of that kind of stuff is what I learned on the field. But I learned from playing. I played for 3 Hall of Fame baseball coaches, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I learned about vision through them. At Pepperdine, the goal was to win the College World Series. Well, I got hurt and left before it happened, but that actually happened. Setting moonshot goals and going for it, getting everybody on the team moving in the same direction. And so there's all these lessons that I didn't realize at the time that were able to carry over to my professional career. And as we were backstage, you mentioned I had some great leaders, some terrible leaders. I also had some terrible leaders, terrible coaches. I had one coach who made everything about him. if things went well, it was his play calling, it was his lineup. But the second something went wrong, he pushed out the blame on everybody else. And I just thought, what a terrible way to motivate or demotivate your team. And so experiencing something like that, I've always learned, or I've always tried to put my team first, give them the wins. And if things didn't go well, congratulate them. But if things didn't go well, as a small business owner or as leader, I would always say, hey, I have your back, as other teammates would in sports. And as a leader, I have your back, and I'll take the brunt of it, and we'll work together and we'll get through this. So there's all kinds of lessons and skills you learn from playing sports that carry over to the business world.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Pharaoh Skincare. I would have never imagined I'd be talking about skincare, but this stuff is truly amazing. Pharaoh is revolutionizing skincare by replacing harmful chemicals with natural ingredients sourced from regenerative farms. Now, weightlifting is tough on the hands, and Pharaoh's Epic Dermis is the best product I've ever used to get my callous hands back to normal and stay in the game. Now I use it every day. Pharaoh also works to reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and improve overall skin health. As Pharaoh CEO Charles Mayfield likes to say, a little Pharaoh goes a long way. Deep Leadership Podcast listeners can save 15% off all of their products by using the code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at pharaoh.life. That's FARROW.life. This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com.
Way to eat a tea. You're listening to an app at PC Game Pass. Want new games on day one like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? How about living out your Sims life with EA Play? We're talking high-quality PC games all for one low monthly price. We got you. Learn more at xbox.com/PC Game Pass or click the banner. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle available December 9th, 2024. Game catalog varies by region and over time. Okay, that's the ad. You can go back to doing whatever you were doing now.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
It's really interesting that you have these foundational experiences that sort of set in motion like your leadership path. And I know, my military background was the same thing. Like I didn't realize I was learning all these leadership skills. I was just doing the job, right? And then you get out. And it really was only 10 years ago I started thinking like, why am I leading my businesses this way? And I'm like, oh, wow, it's because this is the way we did in the military. And it made sense, right? And it always stuck with me is that's the right way to do things. And so it's interesting to see the parallels to your athletic career being a similar thing. Like you go back to what worked or how you felt in the moment or the experiences you had with a good coach. And I want to have that impact on my employees in the same kind of way. Or how do you set the vision, like you said, of winning the College World Series? What is the moonshot for our business? And how do we get people excited and get them on board with that? And so you learn all these great lessons. And it sounds like you've now suddenly realized like, oh, this all came from my baseball career. Yeah, and I think one parallel between the military and baseball was also that there is some command and control when it comes to leadership, of course, and that doesn't really fly these days too much anywhere. But even with that being said, you learn work ethic, and you also, what's really helped, I learned from all these coaches, is that they really help inspire you as well, right? They help motivate you, inspire you, and I would say the motivation would help me build up that work ethic that I have that's really been helpful for me over the years.
Yeah. I think the coaches can. One of the things I see is they see potential in a player that maybe the player doesn't see themselves, and I see that in great leaders where they'll see somebody, and I'm like that. I love developing talent, like just finding a raw diamond and like, oh shoot, this person's got something that I've never seen before. I have an employee like that right now that I'm just seeing some glimmers of it, and I'm trying to give him those opportunities where he can express and do some things that are challenging and really just bring his kind of let his expertise blossom. But I see it, and it's like, I love that. And I know great coaches do that too. They see something in a player that's special and they work to develop it. I love that about coaches.
I think that's one of the keys for your listeners out there who are leaders or want to be leaders. I think great leaders do just that. Sometimes they bring out things in people that people don't even know that they have in them, or they don't even realize. I mean, I remember I had this one young lady, I think this was about 10 years ago. She was 26 years old and she was down on herself. And I said, hey, look at what you've already accomplished. This, and this. And she didn't even realize it, but having somebody, a leader who believed in her, helped her really build up her confidence. And that's something, whether you're a parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, I think that's one of the real special things that great leaders can do, is they can make people understand how great they are or what they've been able to accomplish and inspire them to continue to do more, just like it sounds like you're doing with your current employee.
Yeah. I think even you learn that from parenting. You sort of figure out like, what do your kids excel at and what are they interested in? You give them those opportunities and you let them, blossom and grow in the areas that they are excited about. And the same thing with employees. If you get people, engaged and excited about things that they're excited about, and you put them in the right role where they feel like they've been put on earth to do that one thing, and they're in the role to do that in your company, you sort of just have to get out of the way because it's going to work out well. And that's a hard thing to do with leaders. It means getting to know your people and getting to know, what excites them, what gets them out of bed every morning, what do they really want to do in their life. And if you can match the needs of the business and the things that they want to do, and you put those in place in pursuit of the organization's goals, it's magic when it happens. And it's hard to do, but it's magic when it happens.
I agree 100%. And my leadership, I'm kind of curious to see what you think. I think we're on the same page here, is I'm a big fan on focusing on people's strengths over their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you shouldn't improve people's weaknesses, but I think great leaders do just what you said. They get curious, they're present, and they learn where people are strong. And typically when people are strong, they're passionate about that and they're going to want to do better. Going back to a baseball analogy, for listeners out there who like baseball, somebody can play third base, but maybe they're a much better pitcher. I think it's the coach's responsibility to take the team that they have, the talent that they have, and carve it out and put the pieces of the puzzle together so people are in the best position to succeed. And that's why I think it's important to focus on strengths instead of trying to push the rock up the hill all the time on weaknesses. Of course, try to improve the weaknesses where possible, but I think that there's a lot more bang for your buck if you take those strengths, and a lot of the times they're not all the way maximized, so help them get to that level and really improve in those areas.
I love that. It's such a great point. One of the books that really changed my thinking on this was a book called First Change All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. And he said that people over the age of 30 don't change much. And so we should stop spending time trying to change them by, like you said, improving their weaknesses, but instead capitalize on their strengths. And like, what are they great at? And like put them in the role where they're great at, and we spend so much time as leaders, especially I saw that in big corporations, we spend a lot of time dealing with challenging employees. Well, a lot of cases, those challenging employees are just in the wrong role. They're good at something. We have to figure out what they're great at, plug them into that, just to your point, where they can grow those strengths and contribute in the best way they can to the organization. So instead of trying to change them and trying to make an operations guy be a marketing guy, it's not going to work, right? You put him in the right role. Like you said, a first baseman and a pitcher, they're different. They're different people.
Yeah. And, a story I have about that is a gentleman came on our team. His name is Joe Patty. He came in as a sales rep, and he had all the core values of Learnit, and he was a great team member, but he really struggled when it came to doing sales. He just couldn't pick it up. But I knew he was somebody who had a great work ethic. He was disciplined. He would show up on time, got along with people. He was a team player. So I sat him down and I just said, hey, Joe, I think that you're somebody we want to have around here. You're obviously miserable with doing what you're doing. And I just kind of got curious again. And it turned out that he had a computer science degree. He liked acting. And he's been a fantastic instructor for 10 years for us now. Mm-hmm. And that was putting him in a position to succeed. Now, I'm sure you feel the same way. Sometimes people are just not the right fit and they just don't belong. And I always, some of the people I coach and work with is don't always just try to move people around if they're not doing well. Sometimes they just need to be coached out. But if you had somebody in this case like Joe, who had a lot of the strengths and a lot of the values that we wanted at Learnit, there's ways to find where to put them to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I like to say is that sometimes we have people in our organizations that they're like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit within our puzzle, and it is not that they're not a good person, they're just not a good fit for our organization. And so they're also, but I also believe that the perfect puzzle piece for someone else's puzzle. And so one of the best things we can do when people don't fit is to coach them out, like you said, and then help them land into that right puzzle that they fit and they belong. And every time I've done that with employees that just didn't work out, I've seen them thrive where they go, and they go to their place that fits them better and what they're naturally gifted towards. And so it's always been, I've always seen that it's just the wrong piece to it's not the puzzle piece that fits within our puzzle.
Exactly. And sometimes, a lot of times, leaders at Learnit or companies we work with, especially new leaders, they'll feel miserable having to let people go. They're like, oh, this is terrible. I have to do this. Well, first of all, people should never be let go if it's a surprise to them. Hopefully there's coaching and performance going on during the time. But a lot of times, John, people are relieved when they get let go because they're just miserable coming to work every day. Yeah. And so you're helping them move on and find a perfect organization, like you said, the perfect piece to a puzzle in a different organization. Now, I also think that happens sometimes as companies evolve. If you're an organization and you're just starting off, and let's say you're going from $500,000 to maybe $3 million, and you have somebody who's the head of operations, maybe they're fantastic for that role. But maybe when you get to 3 or 4 million and you're now at 50 employees, 100, 200 employees, maybe they're not the right person. Maybe they're not the right fit for that anymore. And it's time for them to move on. And I think it's your responsibility as a leader to that person, but also to your organization to help that person transition out, help them find other jobs if you can. And I've done this many times in my career where I've had hard conversations with somebody and I would just be like, hey, I really appreciate everything done. It's time for you to move on. And maybe they don't love it at first, but I've seen people, really thrive after that. And that's why I like to say that, there are people that I work with who are friends, but I like to look at it as more of a team over a family. And I think as a leader, a small business owner, that it's your responsibility to put an elite team on the field at all times. And a lot of times that takes making hard decisions.
I love that. To put an elite team on the field at all times. I like to think of my company. We're a small manufacturing company, and I see ourselves as like, we compete with the big guys. We're the smallest competitor in our industry. And I like to think of us as a Navy SEAL team. So we may be small, but we're just as mighty as a land army. Like we can wreak havoc on a land army because I consider us like a SEAL team. We have experts in all different areas, and we're small, but we're very effective. And I love that idea of think of it a team, not a family, but a team. And that's a great analogy. One of the things I was thinking about as you were going through that is that even from my experience, and I would, for leaders listening in, is that your organization might shift underneath your feet too, and it might be time for you to leave. And I had that happen in my corporate career where, I was in a company that was kind of early in its corporate life, and they were hiring general managers who were out of the box thinkers. They were getting things done. They basically we were given a lot of autonomy. We were told make money. Send it to, in this case, it was Zurich was our headquarters. Make money, send it to Zurich, and then keep doing it. And that's what our directions were. And I thrived in that kind of environment because it wasn't very, there was a lot of autonomy, a lot of accountability, and it was all about results. And I loved it. But over time, the company morphed and grew into a global company where everything was top-down managed, and my degrees of freedom kept going away year after year. So I was still responsible for the business and accountable, but I didn't have the authority to make the decisions. And so the organization changed, and the kind of person they wanted running the businesses was not the maverick, get things done kind of guy. It was the one that followed the rules. And I wasn't that person. So I found myself like, I don't fit within this organization anymore. It's time for me to leave. So you might find yourself in that kind of situation where the organization shifts underneath your feet and you're no longer, and I wasn't enjoying myself either. And I was having fun in those small business days. I didn't like it when it was a big business.
And I was listening to one of your other episodes where your guest said that only 10% of leaders have self-awareness. And I think that this is a great example of having self-awareness and being honest with yourself that, maybe, and again, I look at it as different between a learn-it-all and a know-it-all. Maybe it's like you can't have your stick in the ground saying, this is how it's always been. This is what the organization is. Like you said, John, sometimes the organization is going to shift under your feet. Well, there's really nothing you can do about it. They're moving in a different direction. Either you got to learn and adapt it and get on board, or if you're miserable coming to work every day, then it's time to make an exit. Go do something different. There's nothing wrong with quitting and changing and moving on. I mean, you've given it your all, but you got to have that self-awareness to be honest with yourself that, hey, maybe this isn't a great fit. Otherwise, maybe your leader or manager or board member or somebody's going to make that decision for you. But it's better to be proactive when it comes to that than being reactive.
Yeah, I think, to what you just said, if you're starting to feel miserable, start thinking about like when was a time when I loved it. I love coming to work every day. And then you start getting a picture of what you really enjoy about what you do. And you can find where, for my case at least, I discovered soon, this is what's missing from my job. Like my autonomy, the adrenaline of like no safety net, and I'm out there, it's all about results and it's all based on my decisions, who I hire, who I fire, who I promote. And I missed that. I missed that adrenaline of doing it on my own. Instead, I had safety nets everywhere and I had approval processes everywhere. I'm like, this is not fun. I had lost all of its...
it's like a 180.
Yeah, it was a complete 180. And I found myself sort of like, I'm the wrong person for this job. This is not who I am. I'm not really good at just listening to, getting permission for everything. I'm about getting things done. So anyways, for me, it wasn't a fit. And I think, again, go back to where you think about what you really loved about your job in the past and find the position where you get to do what you love. So one thing I wanted to shift the discussion. We're talking about the learn-it-all leader. Can you create a learn-it-all organization? And what does that look like? And how do you build that in an organization's culture?
So at Learnit, we do a lot of manager training, leadership training, and a lot of the customers and clients we work with, they want to build what I like to call a learning culture. And building a learning culture, it really starts with leadership. I mean, leaders have to be bought into it, right? And they need to be championing it. And when it comes to learning, it can be formal training, coaching like you and I do, or it could be informal. But it starts with leadership in the sense that you want to be able to create time and space for people to go out and try things and learn in learn in the flow, so that you turn it into an environment where people feel safe and they have that autonomy where they can try things, and if things break and fail, that they can learn from it. And one of the best ways to do that is to have leaders who aren't afraid to admit that they don't have all the answers, right? That they don't have that they don't know everything, and that they're vulnerable enough to say, hey, I don't have an answer to this, so I'm going to go reach out to this person and I'm going to learn from you. And I'm going to learn from you. And we're going to do this together as a team. And I think when you do that and you create an environment where people are curious, and that's where ideas bubble up all the time from all different directions. And then sure, you could layer that in with what Learnit does, where you invest in your team and you set aside training and coaching. And at that point, it's really important too. I like to call it learning time off, LTO, people have PTO, but you actually, you invest in training for people, but you actually give them space and time to do the learning and do the training. Because people want to continue to evolve their skills. And I think now more than ever, I mean, we've been at it. I've been at it for 3 decades now. I think now more than ever, you need to be a learning culture because the average lifespan of skills are only 6 months now. And so with AI and everything else going on, the rapid pace of change, I think one of the top skills you could have as an organization, as an individual, is learning agility, the ability to learn, change, and adapt, and creating an environment where that is acceptable and rewarded. And, that's where people really thrive. And so it just goes back to kind of starting with leadership. And I know one of your sayings is leadership matters. And in my case, that's where it really matters, where leaders get involved and they champion it and they give people the opportunities and the space to learn and grow. And I think it really benefits organizations because, I'll just say it again, ideas pop up from everywhere. They bubble up from everywhere, from frontline workers, because everybody's trying to learn, grow, and hey, maybe we could do this differently. Maybe we could approach this. And, you're talking about that some of the manufacturing firms are much bigger and probably much slower. They don't have that kind of environment where you're Navy SEAL type environment where people are learning, trying, and doing things differently. And that's how you can beat people and you can grow and advance.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. The environment where if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. We're going to learn from those mistakes. And I think when you have a culture where, where you fire people that make mistakes, then no one wants to make a mistake. No one tries new things. Everybody's afraid to, color outside the lines, and then nothing gets done. So the culture, how the leadership establishes the culture can create the kind of learning environment you were talking about. It's really critical. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend who works for 1,000-person company, and everybody is afraid to say or do anything.
Yeah,
it's from the CEO down. Everybody's yes men, and if they don't do it the way the CEO wants it, then they're afraid for their jobs.
Yeah.
So there's really no growing and evolving there. And I asked my friend, I'm like, why do you stay around? And he said, well, it's a tough out there to find other jobs, but there's really no growth in an organization like that because you can't come up with ideas or give constructive feedback to the senior leaders because it's this way or the highway. So people are scared. And who wants to work in an environment like that? I wouldn't even want to lead in an environment like that.
Yeah. Well, the company I worked for became what I call the good news company. No one ever brought any but bad news up because they fear being fired. So it just, everything was good. Everything was run, but it wasn't good. But we all said it was good. And so we just ignored the bad things. And then that's not good. You're not learning, you're not growing, you're not making improvements. You're just sweeping it under the rug, moving on to the,
You got your head down trying to keep your job.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different attitude altogether. This has been fantastic. What final message would you like to leave, Damon, with our listeners right now?
Well, for your listeners out there, what I like to say is, if you're an aspiring leader, you might be saying to yourself, oh, Damon's, he's been doing this for 30 years. He was born this way. If I can do it, you can do it. And I'll go back to what we opened with. I believe great leaders aren't born or made. They're constantly in the making. So go out there and try things. Don't be afraid to fail. And when you try things that they don't work out, give yourself a pat on the back for trying, because there's so many people out there, John, who don't try anything. So I would say give yourself credit for the process instead of, whatever the end results are. Just go out there, have fun, try things, and go for it.
Such a great advice, Damon. I really appreciate that. Yeah, be a learn-it-all leader, not a know-it-all leader. I think the world needs more learn-it-all leaders. So such a great concept, such a great important message. How can people find more about you, your books? You've got a podcast, and your company.
So I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, Damon Lembi. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, getting better at it. I've got a podcast that's relatively new, not like you, John, called the Learn It All Podcast. I'm having a lot of fun with that. And if you want to check out our classes, you can go to learnit.com. If you find something on learnit.com that you like, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'll give you a free class, whether it's on Excel or emotional intelligence. Just hit me up for that. So those are really the best ways to get in touch. But I'd love to hear from you. And of course, I've got a book called The Learn It All Leader that you could find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you get your books.
Fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Damon's resources. And again, it's a really important point. If something in this conversation really got you thinking, you have more questions, We'll have Damon's LinkedIn profile there, and you can reach him there. Ask him a question. Say you heard him on Deep Leadership, and you had this, this one point that Damon brought up that you were confused about or wanted more clarification. He's there. He's going to answer the question. He comes on the show because he wants to share his knowledge and wants to help you become a better leader. And so that's why we have him on the show. So again, links are in the show notes. And again, I highly encourage you to check out his company, check out the podcast, check out the book that he's written. He's got 2 books, but the Learn Not Leader is the one that we've been kind of highlighting today. Take a look at that as well. Damon, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your experience, your background, and all of what you've learned in your leadership journey to our audience.
Well, John, again, thank you for your service, and thanks for having me on your show, and keep up all the great work that you do.
Thank you very much. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.
Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
We're the founders of Electrocast Media, bringing you great podcasts like Nightmare Road Stories, Tech Talk Revolution, and Bodacious Minds.
Electrocast networks include Ruby for female empowerment, the Best Business Network, and GPN for geopolitics. We built this company to create community and amplify diverse voices, and we really appreciate your support.
So, keep listening to Electrocast podcasts and hear the culture.
Electrocast.
Hey, heard you like podcasts? Well, check out Dollar Bets. 2 sports guys with faces for radio, betting live money against each other on air. That's Dollar Bets with a Z. Find us on the Winner's Edge.